I know what you're thinking. Spoilers for X-Men 97, Episode 7 of Season 2, Strange Land, Savage Heart. How could I, one of Magik's #1 fans, think this episode, where Magik is pretty dopily killed in a flashback, is one of the best episodes of the season? Well, it's complicated. Also, my cat Mortimer is here. He likes this episode even though it doesn't have his favorite cat from the Marvel Comics universe, Zabu, who would potentially be on the Savage Land. I don't know what happened to him, Kazar, and all the other Savage Land characters. But I think this episode is really interesting. We'll talk about what I think it does really well, what some people maybe correctly think it does kind of stupidly, and what this means for the overall trajectory of the season, because we are at episode 7 out of 9. There are only 2 more episodes left. Alright, so most interesting thing about this episode from the beginning for me, it's a Nightcrawler episode. We have not gotten a Nightcrawler episode. We've gotten episodes with some standout Nightcrawler action sequences, and I will say Nightcrawler's role on the team has been somewhat cemented since his introduction in Season 2, but he hasn't gotten too much to do yet, mostly because he wasn't in episodes 1 and 2. He got some lines in 3 and 4, but that was mostly the Magneto Professor and Apocalypse show. Then he was not in episodes 5 and 6. I mean, he was in 6 at the very, very, very end. So I'm glad that this episode gave Nightcrawler the spotlight. He is one of my favorite characters, mostly because one of the shows I came up on was X-Men Evolution, and that show positions Nightcrawler as like the most fun character. He also just has the coolest power, one of the most fun designs, and he uses swords. Like, Nightcrawler is such a slam dunk of a character. And he is an interesting connection into the season, especially since, as we'll see in the end of the episode, what we're working to is some sort of Gambit conclusion, and Gambit is Nightcrawler's sort of brother-in-law. This season has also spent a lot of time talking about the idea of a mutant messiah or prophesized god. So it is very interesting that one of the characters in the series does have very strong religious convictions and is able to relate that to what's going on in the narrative. But it's not all Nightcrawler, as this episode starts with something that we have to talk about, even though, yeah, listen, okay. That we knew from the trailers, Magik was probably dead, because you saw the shot of the altar from this episode, and front and center is Peter's painting of Illyana. And it made enough sense because she wasn't in any of the promo material. Even though, if you play Rivals, or Tokon, or read the comics these days, like, Magik is a very popular character. Would have made more than enough sense to introduce her here, make her a big player. But instead, we start, after 12 character cards, the most character cards we've had so far, back at the attack on Genosha. We see Magneto fighting the Wild Sentinel, and then we get a look at Peter and Illyana Rasputin, who were there. Makes enough sense, we haven't really seen him this season, but the character of Colossus has been in the animated series before. Seems to be a mutant in relatively good standing, so why wouldn't he be at the party? And they, like all the rest of the heroic mutants, join in to try to save as many people as they can. Magik and Colossus are both able to materialize their costumes, which I assume Magik does with Magik. I'm not sure what Colossus is doing, unless he always has that costume on underneath his suit, and by armoring up he just destroys the suit around it. That'd be cool. But Illyana uses her mutant stepping discs to save 3 mutants before they are blasted by the Wild Sentinel, and Colossus tosses a car at it. Now, there are a lot of questions about what Magik's deal is so far, and they will not be answered. But there are some things we can infer based on stuff we've already seen, and I think the more you know about it, the more confusing she gets. For instance, this Magik's costume would appear to be the standard X-Men training costume, something that Illyana wore around her time in the New Mutants. Now, we have no indication that the New Mutants ever existed in this universe, but it seems like Illyana was part of some class of mutants between the official mutants that are on the X-Men and this new group of mutants that are just joining the X-Men. Who else is on that team? Unclear. Jubilee feels the right age for it. Jubilee was not disappointed in Wolfsbane, even though Wolfsbane would have been a student at the Institute around the same time as Jubilee. We saw Cannonball before, but he's already wearing his X-Force uniform. Sunspot was on the X-Men for like a couple of days before defecting to Magneto before becoming a member of X-Force, and we haven't really gotten more from the members of the New Mutants. So then, like, I assume what happened is Illyana came with Colossus to live at Xavier's, like she usually does in the comics, got mutant powers, and was just sort of trained on her own, maybe with Kitty. Never really seen Kitty in this show, although she does exist because she was on that board at the end of last season. Like, maybe it was a class of 2. But the other interesting thing is Illyana has her soul sword. Now, people recognize the soul sword as part of Illyana's kit, but it is not part of her mutant powers. It is something she was forced to develop while she was a prisoner in Limbo, which is sort of like a hell dimension where she spent a large chunk of her childhood. The soul sword is a weapon forged from pieces of Magik's soul, and outside of just being a powerful sword, it also has the power to cut through magic. Not her magic. Magic like Doctor Strange magic. I mean, it could cut through her as well, I guess. Well, no, I guess it couldn't, because it is her soul, so you can't hurt her with it. But anyway, the fact that she has the soul sword means this version of Magik has been to Limbo. which makes sense because when we saw Morph transform into Magik in episode 3 of season 1, Morph also transformed into the Dark Child, which is the evil version of Ilyana's personality that was brought out while she was in limbo, and sometimes takes over. If we had never seen the Soul Sword in this show, I would assume this is a Magik who just found out she has superpowers, she creates stepping discs, and that's it. But because we have the Soul Sword, it does suggest that this is a Magik who kind of knows what she's doing. She's able to fight, she's able to teleport, like she's been through it, otherwise she wouldn't have the sword. Which makes it a little silly that in the show, the Wild Sentinel clearly targets Magik. Magik sees this and then doesn't do anything. Now I think you can come up with some excuses in universe why this isn't very dumb of her. And because sure, like maybe she was scared, maybe she got a good look at the Wild Sentinel and like froze, but I don't know, that just doesn't feel like Magik either. Again, she has been to the Hell Dimension. But okay, here's an option. And this is only because I like this episode a lot. I do think this vid is kind of clunky. I've seen people comparing it to Pa Kent's death in Man of Steel. However, I do think there are some things about this that make it a little different. First of all, we don't know how much power it takes for Ilyana to use a stepping disc. Maybe this version of Ilyana is able to do one and then she's kind of gassed out. So even though in other versions she could teleport away immediately, this version of Ilyana cannot do another teleport that quickly, and she's kind of tired from having to do one. I don't think that's a great way to define her character because she's usually pretty good at this, but sure, that's an option. Option 2, she underestimated how powerful the laser beams were. This one makes a little bit less sense when you see her watching the laser beams do a lot of damage seconds before this, but whatever. And then third, the answer I like, and I do think is what the show is going for. We see all of this play out more or less through Colossus's perspective. Like sure, we're sort of a neutral observer, but especially Magik's death, we experience it through Colossus's eyes. And we know because we saw the Wild Sentinel in season 1, it can shoot these blasts very quickly if it needs to. So I think the answer I use for why all this isn't dumb is that while it takes a couple of seconds for us, it happens almost instantaneously in real life. We're only seeing it in slow motion because that's how Colossus experienced it, right? He called out to his sister, he saw her turn back to him, time stood still, but in reality, Ilyana teleports, waits a second, and then explodes, right? That's my guess. Now, like some but not all of the other characters that died on Genosha, we see Colossus cradling Magik's body. So a body exists. I know a lot of people have been hoping that Magik will be brought back as a horseman in the future. While that is certainly possible, I wouldn't get your hopes up, especially because if we were using horsemen to bring characters back from the dead, there are a lot of other characters who I think need excuses to be brought back from the dead. Like, besides Gambit, other characters like Iceman or Marrow, even Banshee that died on Genosha. Those are characters that I think the best way to bring them back to life if they wanted to was as horsemen. Whereas Ilyana can sort of die and come back. She can fight her way out of limbo. Or she can meet Madeline Pryor and the two of them can fight their way out. Because Madeline Pryor is currently the ruler of limbo in the comics. And I like that those two characters are kind of in the same place. And if you're like, well, if you die, you don't go to limbo. Sure, but maybe a demon like stole Maddie's soul or something like that. So I wouldn't be surprised if next season or something like that, there is a quest for Magik, where maybe we do the story where Pixie and a bunch of kids go to limbo, meet with Magik, maybe she gets resurrected. I don't know. There's options. I hope she is around if we ever do the Revolutionary Cyclops arc, because she was a big player there. But for the purpose of the episode, I think her death is interesting. And because of that, I am able to overlook how slow this death goes. Would it have been cool if Ilyana had a Gambit-like moment where she at least tried to do a portal to get out of there and it didn't work and she died, or even maybe she sacrificed herself to save some other mutants, but it was way clearer that there was no other way for her to get out of there? Yeah, I think that would have been better, but here we are. Okay, so we get Graydon Creed. He's running for president, a character that was mentioned in episode 5 of this season.
Logan told me Graydon Creed was your kid. I couldn't see it, but now...
And we saw a lot in X-Men the Animated Series. They're going to read off a list of his crimes later in the episode. But this guy's a pretty big deal. He created the Friends of Humanity, who have been responsible for all kinds of stuff this season. And you know what? He's running on an anti-mutant hate ticket. But then his rally is interrupted by a bunch of guys. Guys we really haven't seen or don't know very much about except for Colossus. But these are the acolytes. Now the acolytes are traditionally a group of mutants who follow Magneto or a Magneto-esque ruler. There have been many incarnations of the acolytes. What we see over the course of this episode is pretty much everyone that's ever been on this team, as if it is one team. And we even got some of the acolytes in the original season with Fabian Cortez. But this is a new version of the acolytes, led by a character named Exodus. Now Exodus is great, and honestly, as a fan of Exodus as well, I'm kind of more bummed that, spoilers for the episode, he dies at the end of this, and less bummed that Magik is dead, because Magik's already having a moment. She doesn't need to be on the show. It would be great to have her on the show, and she can always come back. Exodus, is not having a moment. There was a bit on Krakoa where he was a big player, but while Exodus has a cool design, a fun power set, and a very interesting whole deal, I think this show cycles through him a little too quickly. One thing I will point out about the acolytes, while we have not seen them so far on this series, they have been part of the recent X-Men 97 continuity because they've been big players in the comics. The first X-Men 97 companion comic follows Rusty and Skids as they get arrested during a mutant demonstration that they don't have any part in, and are rescued by Exodus. We will see Rusty and Skids at the trial later in the episode. But a lot of these other acolytes make cameos earlier in those comics. Random is there, Frenzy is there, a lot of the important ones. Now I'm not going to go through all of them, but these main 5 that we're introduced to immediately, who I would say are 5 of the more important ones: Frenzy, Chrome, Uniscone, Senyaka, Random, and Gargoyle. I like that if you're not familiar with Colossus, outside of watching his sister die, this might be your introduction to this character. While he is tough and fights the cops, he is also polite. That is traditionally how Colossus works. He is the big softy, as we'll see later. He paints, he is cultured, but he is also the biggest, toughest member of the X-Men. But this whole fight ends when Exodus shows up, and we get the news report about what Exodus has been doing, although we don't get a great introduction to who Exodus is. Also, I just want to point out, on this news report, the image we are shown of the acolytes contains one other character that for some reason I don't remember seeing in the original fight, and that's Amelia Vaught. She could turn into Mist. Not incredibly important here, but she is a pretty important member of the acolytes. But okay, let's talk about Exodus, because I want to get some things out about what his deal is, because I think it's very interesting, even though not all of those things come up in this episode. First of all, he is a crusader. Nightcrawler will call him a crusader, but not just because he is on a crusade. Jean-Benet Duperre existed in the 1300s and was part of the Crusades. His life was extended after he met, another interesting thing about him, Apocalypse, who activated his mutant power. So Exodus is both a historical mutant, like Apocalypse was, and is connected to Apocalypse, the main villain of this season. His mutant powers, the ones we see, are teleportation, and more importantly, telekinesis. Specifically, Exodus is the most powerful telekinetic mutant that exists. And this isn't explicitly said, so this might not be a thing in the show at all, Exodus's power is stronger if he is believed in. Belief powers Exodus. Like clapping to show Tinkerbell you believe in magic, and that gives her the ability to do whatever Tinkerbell does. I guess fly, probably, mostly. Does she do magic? It kind of is magic, right? I don't know. But that's what's fun about Exodus. He did something like this in the comics. He was the next Magneto, which is interesting because that's kind of what Polaris was described in last week's episode. Those two characters will never meet, and I think that's fine because Polaris doesn't seem to have much of a relationship with Magneto, even though Professor X airdropped Lorna all of his Magneto memories. Still, I don't think there's anything interesting he could say to her, and I think it'd be really weird if she joined the X-Men for 1 week and then immediately switched over to being an acolyte. I do think it would have been interesting to see her reject Exodus, but that's not really what this episode is about. So Exodus creates a hostage video, and Exodus makes what I think are some kind of reasonable demands. Really, when you get down to it, he makes them a little meaner than you might like. But what he's asking for is free all of the mutants that are currently in custody of X-Factor, which I assume we're supposed to have some sympathy towards, since in episode 2 of this season, Jubilee freed all the mutants that were currently being held by X-Factor. Now, those were kids, and the mutants we're shown are adults like Pyro, Avalanche, and Forearms, but still, it's the same X-Factor. They're still just rounding up whoever. Seems pretty reasonable that they should let those mutants go. But then he throws in the very vague, stay out of our way. And in case you didn't notice based on his attitude, at the end of the call, Exodus reminds us he is French. Bonne journée. So the team goes to find Exodus, and it turns out he is in the Savage Land. The Savage Land is an area where time forgot, that has dinosaurs and jungle, and I believe it's in Antarctica. Mr. Sinister used it as a base, like Rogue mentions later, and it turns out Exodus is there now. So the 5 X-Men we're following here are Bishop and Polaris, for reasons we'll get to, Nightcrawler, because he's the main character of the episode, Rogue, because she's like emotional support for Nightcrawler, and then Beast, because I guess he's the only one that can fly the jet, and also he has to have one of these moments every episode.
Detecting a familiar energy field, akin to a signature established when Mr. Sinister... Oh no! Curious. It appears to share a striking resemblance to that of our very own... Danger Room?
Computer bank.
These glyphs. Oh, my heavens. It's not deja vu, Rogue. We've been here before.
But the X-Jet goes down, which has happened every episode for the last 3 episodes. Planes just continue to crash on this show. And if I remember correctly, this will not be the last. Bishop falls out of the plane. Polaris goes and catches him. Very cool moment where they sexily land on each other. And you're like, oh, okay, I like this. This isn't a pairing I'm familiar with from the comics, so why not? Also, I just want to point out, because the other X-Men, Nightcrawler, Rogue, and Beast, will just land in the ship and will be, like, injured, but survive. They have no idea what happened to Polaris and Bishop for the rest of this episode until Polaris and Bishop just show up, and I just want to say they take that very well. And maybe that's just an X-Men thing, like your friends die off screen and you're like, I guess we'll never see Bishop and Polaris again, oh well. Or you're like, they probably landed on a pterodactyl or something, it's fine. But we learned that Bishop absorbed some energy before he could use his mutant power to dispel that energy, and then he lost his mutant power, which means it was just irradiated, and he's gonna explode. So they gotta figure something out. But then Colossus and some other acolytes rescue Nightcrawler, Rogue, and Beast. And while originally Colossus does seem like he buys into whatever they're saying, Kurt, because he knows that Colossus cares about family, uses his relationship with Creed to convince Colossus that he should be able to see his brother and make sure he's okay, even though they're going to execute him. And we learn that Exodus has turned this part of the Savage Land into a safe house for mutants, and specifically his acolytes. And I'm just going to say this here, because I don't really know where else to say it. I have never been an enormous fan of the acolyte costumes. However, something about the color in this episode makes them totally work for me. I don't know what it is, because it's a very similar look, but I kind of love the acolyte costumes. And we get what is a very important line.
But your sister would never want you to join the acolytes.
How can you know, Beast? How can any of us know the desires of the dead?
And we get a look at the shrine. It is the memorial for all the mutants. A couple of important ones we see here. You got Marrow in the bottom left, Madeline Pryor in the top left, Fishboy in the top right, obviously Illyana Magik in the center. You can also see like a full body shot of Gambit is one of the pictures. And then at the top of all of them, Magneto, along with a bunch of Magneto posters. We see a painting done by Colossus. Like I said, he's a painter, he's a big softy. I feel like I can't remember the last time I saw him paint in a comic. It must have been in Krakoa. This portrait of Illyana, by the way, is pretty much exactly the same as one that Colossus painted and was about to burn after Illyana's death in the comics, but Kitty saved. Colossus had a similar arc in the comics to what he's doing in the show. He joined Magneto's acolytes after his sister was killed. Originally, she died from the legacy virus, a virus that killed mutants. In fact, she was the first big casualty of that era, where Cyclops would eventually be the last, dying to create a cure for the legacy virus. But Illyana's death at the hands of the legacy virus, and while in the protection of Xavier, was what turned Colossus to join Magneto's acolytes, which at the time were led by Exodus, and a lot of the members of that team are here in this episode. I don't know, maybe the most interesting thing Colossus ever did in the comics? And one reason I think Magik's death works in the comics in a way that it does not really work in the show is that in the comics, the death affects everyone. Obviously, Colossus, her brother, but also Kitty, her best friend, the professor, her teacher, who told Colossus she would be safe here. But in the show, we don't really get that because, again, Magik's role in the X-Men is so vague, no character can have cared about Magik specifically. Because we don't know who her friends were, we don't know how long she was on the team. Like, a lot of original X-Men died on Genosha. But Magik feels interesting among them because she is one of the younger ones. You figure that death would hit harder, and you also figure we would have heard about that death by now, but whatever. But again, Nightcrawler very cleverly uses Colossus saying,
Each of us must act to ensure others like us will not lose their brothers and sisters,
as a way to make the case that he needs to check on his brother.
In this, we share the same goal.
So they get to Creed, and Creed is still mean. He kind of knows Bible stuff. But then Exodus shows up. This is where Nightcrawler calls out that he is
our dear Templar.
Again, because Benet has been around since the time of the Crusades. And we set up why I think this episode is so interesting. To protect his brother, Nightcrawler is going to have a public trial against Exodus over whether or not anyone can be redeemed. And this is especially interesting because, and they don't get into it in the episode, Exodus is powered by faith, which means the more people believe in him, the more powerful he is, which would be a problem if someone could prove you were wrong, or even just cause them to doubt your position. So instead of getting in a private fight with Exodus, Kurt makes this a public fight as a way to potentially weaken Exodus. So then real quick, we check back on Polaris and Bishop, who each get a gun, and Polaris comes up with a plan, and we will find out what the plan is. This is suggested by the editing, But even me seeing it again, knowing what the plan is, I'm like, there's gotta be another step besides jump on 2 pterodactyls and just fly them towards the tower. Like, surely that's like to cause a distraction or something like that, but it's like, no, that's the plan. It's a crazy plan, but it will work. And then we get the trial, and so many other acolytes are around the trial. All of these acolytes will get involved in the big fight at the end of the episode, which is why I do want to point out one acolyte in particular that we get a couple of shots at later. And that's Tempo. And I just want to point this out because, like, compared to most of the people here, a lot of them have the power to, like, make a construct or jump and punch really well. Someone like Rusty can create fire. But Tempo has the power to slow or accelerate time. I only want to highlight her because I think the show kind of highlights her by having her not wear an acolyte uniform. And B, just because, like, I think she should be winning the fight. I don't know what the limits are to Tempo, if there are any, but she feels like one of those characters that could easily take down pretty much any enemy she wants to. Except for a psychic, which the X-Men don't have. Also, another member of the Acolytes I want to point out is this guy who has the headpiece that kind of reminds you of what the Scarlet Witch would wear. His character is named Vindaloo. He's not that important, even though he's the only member of the team wearing the tiara. So the trial starts, and Exodus is basically like, this guy's bad. We should be able to kill him, right? And everyone agrees. Nightcrawler tries a different approach, but Creed is the most difficult man ever, which causes this mutant, Barnacle, to say,
"What are we even doing this for?"
I'm only bringing him up because that character's first name is Mortimer, which is the same name as my cat who is walking around on my lap right now. And I know Toad's name is also Mortimer. There's 2 Mortimers in the X-Men, at least. Maybe there's more. I can't think of any others, but you never know. But Nightcrawler makes his argument, which is basically that Graydon Creed was raised by 2 of the most evil mutants, especially Sabretooth, who is basically like the most evil, sadistic X-Men villain. At least Apocalypse believes he's doing what he's doing because of survival of the fittest and some cosmic destiny. Sabretooth is just mean. Kurt gives a big speech that does manage to convince some of the Acolytes, but seems designed exclusively to give Colossus the space to forgive himself for Ileana's death, and you can see that moment here in his face. And so can Exodus, because Exodus is like, we gotta kill this guy now, otherwise I'm gonna lose. But Kurt pleads with Colossus, making the point that Graydon Creed is just a person who's having a difficult time dealing with how his family has affected him. More difficult than Nightcrawler, but basically saying, like, Colossus, you going bad and joining the Acolytes because of what happened to your sister isn't great, but you can change. So it seems like Kurt is arguing that Graydon Creed can change. He's really arguing that Colossus can change. It doesn't have to be all dark and sad. But then Exodus is like, this is going poorly, so he uses his intense telekinesis to try to kill Colossus, which is brave, and probably would have succeeded if not for the psychotic pterodactyl flying plan working and Polaris and Bishop destroying the power inhibitor. Then Exodus beats up the pterodactyls, so Polaris and Bishop fall. Bishop protects Polaris this time. Then everybody gets their powers back. It's an interesting thing because, like, all of the members of the Acolytes had their powers. The X-Men didn't. We never see why the tower only took away some of the X-Men's powers, but not all of them. Not that it matters. Just interesting. And then you got all the X-Men, plus Colossus versus all of the Acolytes, plus Exodus. And because the Acolytes are all covered in metal, like X-Force was, Polaris can just kind of beat up most of them. But then we get this incredibly cool teleporting sword fight between Kurt and Exodus, and it's just like, this is why this episode is so interesting. It really is about something. It is about the difference between Kurt and Exodus. So these 2 mutants with similar faiths, one a priest and the other a Templar, like a knight of the church, use religion to justify killing people, getting power versus saving people, and challenging Nightcrawler by pitting him against someone, has the same power set and kind of aesthetic, but represents everything that Nightcrawler isn't. Kind of an Old Testament versus New Testament thing. Also, I don't know what Exodus, like, makes when he teleports, but whatever it is, he throws them in a Nightcrawler. That's weird. Just want to point out, wonderful sound effect here. And yeah, just the psychic sword fight is so cool. This is the kind of thing that I really, really, really want to see in live action. When the X-Men eventually come to live action and they eventually do a teleporter, I'd love to see something this slick and choreographed. Then Nightcrawler beats Exodus. He says this line that it's like a little much, but he beat Exodus in the fight, so I think he earned it.
You are as you were born, Exodus. A vain soul clamoring for his 15 minutes of faith. Yield!
Then Graydon Creed shoots Exodus. And I saw some people saying online, well, Exodus has a healing factor. And I'm like, this show doesn't think he does. As far as this show is concerned, he is very much dead. He served a purpose to create this version of the Acolytes, and now that Colossus is going to leave it, it seems like the group's kind of going to disappear. I would like to see more of them because I think the idea of this group is cool, but it is not as significant as a group like, say, the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants, or the Marauders, or the Morlocks, X-Force, X-Factor, the Exiles. The Acolytes are a team, but they're a very specific kind of team. I also just want to point out, when Creed takes Nightcrawler hostage, Bishop notices and tells Polaris, to which Polaris replies, "On it." And if I'm Bishop, I'm thinking what Polaris is going to do is use her magnetism powers to move the gun away from Kurt's head. To stop the gun, to take it away, maybe just make it so it can't fire. But instead, Polaris picks up a sword and just drills it at both of them. Unluckily, Kurt teleports away, so Kurt and Creed aren't killed by this sword. And for me, it's like, listen, Bishop and Polaris, I like this pairing. You guys got to work on your communication a little bit. But then Nightcrawler chooses not to kill Creed, and we learn in a voiceover that Creed is planning to run for president, which is bad. And we get this last scene here, which really is, I think, what makes the episode for me. If Colossus is going back to the school now because he's a good guy, and he's back on the X-Men for what is the first time in the series as far as we've seen. Also, him and Nightcrawler are both getting off a jet. I don't know which jet this is. Honestly, I don't know where they store these jets. Even if they had 20, where do you put them? Because they keep blowing up. But whatever. Nightcrawler asks Colossus,
Did I make my case?
and Colossus says,
No, you did not convince me.
which in the moment I'm like, just say you did, you know? The other guy tried to torture you. But then Colossus says something that has been somewhat controversial online.
But you would have convinced Ileana.
Now, the way I read this, because you can see how Nightcrawler and Colossus' back and forth changes over the episode. Beast makes the point earlier,
But your sister would never want you to join the acolytes.
and to that Colossus replies,
How can you know, Beast? How can any of us know the desires of the dead?
right? Because Colossus has completely closed himself off from Ileana, like he does in the books. He's hardened, he's always in his steel form, emotionless, and he's letting Exodus basically just kind of tell him what to do. Because he needs direction, and he blames himself. He says he was in a dark place, he wasn't able to save his little sister. But then, over the course of the trial, Nightcrawler convinces Colossus that they're all human, they're all just people, and these relationships with family do have a profound effect on us, whether we want to acknowledge it or not. And then Exodus says, right as he's about to kill Colossus,
This is how you honor your sister. Let me reunite you with her so you may see the disappointment on her face.
so I think that's the breaking point for Colossus, not just because he's being tortured by his former mentor or leader, but because in that moment, he hears Exodus tell him what Ileana would have wanted. And maybe he's right, because it's hard to say exactly how Ileana would behave in that situation. Would she have no sympathy for someone like Creed? Because Ileana is tough. She's been through it. She's fought actual demons. So this idea of should we kill the guy who wants to kill us all, maybe she would just say yes. On the other hand, Ileana doesn't see things in black and white because of how complicated the situation she's been in are. The idea of the dark child and that relationship between good and evil could make it so that Ileana could see something in Creed that nobody else could. Not that he's a good guy, but just that he is a victim. And being a victim of someone that's really terrible can make you do things that maybe you didn't want to. But in that moment, Colossus realizes that he can know his sister. Instead of forgetting about her, just memorializing her, he can remember who she was. Think, would she be okay with what he's doing? So by saying,
But you would have convinced Ileana.
Colossus is admitting that now he is willing to engage with the memory of his sister and think about her as a person and sort of forgive himself for letting her die. So while that may not have been the definitive answer to how Ileana would have viewed the trial, the fact that Colossus is willing to ask that question, entertain that question, is an indication that Kurt was able to convince him that it's more important to engage with those difficult memories. And you can also read this as Colossus choosing now to remember his sister the way that he does, which is Colossus always thinks of Ileana as this little snowflake, the kid sister he has to protect. And he maybe paints a picture of her that is a little more innocent than Ileana is in reality, but that's the version he's choosing to remember. And that's why in that moment when he says that, he lets down his metal shell and he can feel emotions and feel connected to people again. So that's why I think this episode is so interesting. Forget about Ileana's kind of silly death and whether or not you think Ileana would have shown mercy to Creed. This is really an episode about how Nightcrawler is able to save Colossus from Exodus. And now Colossus is at the school, he's part of the team, so hopefully he's going to be a bigger fixture of the episodes going forward, if not maybe in this season, because it seems like we've got a lot to wrap up in the next few episodes in season 3. And like in the comics, Magik can always come back. And then there's a post-credit scene. Let's talk about that. X-Force goes to Athens, and they find Apocalypse's materials, but it turns out he's all dead. And there's a Gambit card by him. Even though all of the Gambit cards turned into tarot cards earlier, this one stayed as just like a regular playing card. And people have a lot of theories for what this is and how many Apocalypses were in this room before. And we'll see the answer to those next week, and I'm really curious to see how people feel about it. And last thing, and, listen to this bit because it is important, very important to me. I've been talking a while about the Nebula project that I filmed about a year ago, and I finally have an update. We're going to be releasing it as a short film. We're going to premiere it at the Holly Shorts Festival in August 21st of 2026. So less than a month. Then, once we're done with all the festivals, whenever we are able to, we will premiere it on Nebula. This is I don't know exactly how long it is, over 20-minute long short film I wrote, YouTube friend Patrick Willems directed, and Dave and Nebula put together an incredible team, like cinematographers, actors, crew, and made a short film that really looks great. It is called Power Trip, and unless you are at one of the festivals where it screens, the first place to watch this short, again, that I wrote, will be on Nebula. Nebula is a subscription streaming platform that I and a bunch of other YouTubers created. I upload all my videos early and ad-free, including this one. This was here on Nebula first. And then, like my short film, there's all kinds of stuff you can only find on Nebula. Patrick has made other short films. Lindsay Ellis makes video essays exclusively for Nebula. If you've watched the channel, you've seen me plug many of them. The show Jet Lag premieres on Nebula. Tom Scott's England series premieres on Nebula. It is an incredible way to support creators, and we're in the home stretch, so you will very soon be able to see this short film that I wrote and Patrick directed on Nebula. And a year of Nebula is already a steal at $60 a year. That's just $5 a month. But if you go to go.nebula.tv/thenandocut, you can get a year of Nebula for just $30. That is $2.50 a month. It is an incredible deal. It's a great way to support me and a bunch of other creators who either you already love or you are about to love. Again, it is go.nebula.tv/thenandocut. Next week, episode 8 and then episode 9, and we're done with season 2. That's all I got. Stay safe.